that will be significantly disadvantaged by these amendments, of course, are small business operatives, many of whom are family operations with few or no staff outside the family circle. These people welcome the Christmas Day, Boxing Day, contiguous days holiday, and sometimes, for many of them, it's the only break they get for the whole working year. With their competitors opening, many of these will feel the economic pressure to open whether they freely choose to work or not. And of course, if they operate out of a shopping centre, it may be that the terms of their commercial lease would compel them to open their doors and to operate if the centre is operating. And so again, any freedom of choice that might be said to rest with them can be taken away from them by economic forces beyond their control. There's no discernible public pressure in favour of these reforms. The fact is, it is being led, as I indicated, by the government's ideology, and of course the retail sector wishes to have it as well, but we think the benefits they think will be derived from this will be more imagined than real. The fact is these changes are significantly retrograde. Although these are days where the wider community feels that they need to have the 2 days break together, there are also many people in our community for whom these are culturally significant and days, and also significant for religious days. And the fact is that many religious leaders have written to members of this chamber seeking to have these changes rejected, including the Most Reverend Anthony Fisher, the Archbishop of Sydney, the Catholic Archbishop of Sydney, the Most Reverend Peter Comensoli, the Bishop of Broken Bay, and Keith Hamilton, writing as the Senior Minister, Group CEO of Parramatta Mission. Also Glenn Davies, writing as a representative of a range of religious institutions, has also written to inform members of this House of their strong opposition to a reduction in the number of restricted retail trading days in New South Wales, as has Family Voice. Members in this chamber should be very careful about accepting the government's urgings to move in this direction. Those of us on this side of the House know what happens when a political party identified very strongly with certain core values and core beliefs is publicly recognised as transgressing or trashing those significant core values. It's not that long ago, Mr Deputy President, when the Australian Democrats disappeared from our political landscape in the wake of their breach of their electoral promise that there would be no GST on books. It was part of their deal, and they were consigned to the dustbin of history. And a number of us in this chamber, those in the Labor Party, those in the Greens, Christian Democrats, I think also the Shooters and Fishers, all campaigned unambiguously on a platform of protecting the existing restricted trading days in this state, including Boxing Day, and including Christmas Day, Good Friday, Easter Monday, and the half-day Anzac Day public holiday. And for any of those political representatives having sought and obtained election to this place on a platform that included protecting Boxing Day and Christmas Day, to go against that with whatever protections, with whatever compromises may be said to soften the blow, I think will be very poorly received by those in the community who voted for them on that basis. So I think I would urge all members whose election commitments included protecting Boxing Day and Christmas Day will have to think very carefully before casting their vote on the second reading vote in favour of the government's proposal. As I indicated, a number of religious leaders have written to members of this House sharing their concerns, and I'll just read some of them. I know that a subsequent speaker for the opposition will seek to have incorporated into Hansard full copies of that correspondence. I understand there will be no objection to that course of action. In the modern era, we have the technology to be able to do that. The Most Reverend Anthony Fisher, the Catholic Archbishop of Sydney, indicated, and I quote, "The proposed changes would mean retail stores could open for trade on a number of significant Christian holidays. In particular, I'd like to echo the letters you have received from Archbishop Glenn Davies and Bishop Peter Comensoli. For many Australians, the days affected by a lifting of restrictions are days when they would normally fulfil religious obligations, such as Christmas, Good Friday and Easter Sunday. They are also important family occasions. I am concerned that changes to the legislation would send the message that commerce is more important than religious observance and family time, and would effectively coerce workers to give up the little time still reserved for our community for such purposes. I respectfully encourage you to oppose any changes to the legislation in light of the impact on families and religious observances." Unquote. The Most Reverend Peter Comensoli has stated, quote, "As a pastor, my hope is that all Christians will be free from any pressure or coercion to work on days which for them constitute celebrations that carry both a religious observation and the opportunity to share joyfully with family and loved ones. And I highlight the relevant days, in this case being Christmas Day, Good Friday and Easter Sunday. In addition, Boxing Day has become an extension of family Christmas celebrations for many in Australia and is also owed legal provisions for its protection and care." Unquote. Keith Hamilton, writing as Group CEO of Parramatta Mission, also indicated his concern that amendments would have an adverse impact on families and communities in this state, and calling on the Parliament to reject the moves in this bill. And he says, and I quote, "I believe that allowing retailers to open on culturally significant days, such as Boxing Day and Easter Day, is out of step with the needs and views of the community at large. All families and communities should be able to celebrate culturally significant days. With just 4.5 days exempt from trading throughout the year, any expansion in retail trading days is unnecessary and would have an adverse effect on our social fabric. Where once Christmas to Australia Days was a summer Sabbath, now is Christmas to New Year, so that making Boxing Day a retail trading day will further reduce this important downtime for the Australian community. Family and community time is important. Men and women should not be considered as a resource for the creation of goods and services. All people are created in the image of God with inherent worth." Unquote. There are a number in this vein, but you don't have to be a religious person, Mr Deputy President, to understand that for many people in our community, having Christmas Day and Boxing Day together, protected, where the shops do not open in most parts of the state, is what is needed for people to have important downtime, to regenerate, to refresh themselves for the year ahead. And for many people, it is the only time they have in the year to meaningfully reconnect with their family, their friends and their communities. And as I stated at the early part of my contribution, for those persons living in blended families where children have to find time to spend time with different parents, at the moment sometimes they will go to one parent for Christmas Day, another parent for Boxing Day. If those parents, or indeed the children, are effectively being required to work on Christmas Day or Boxing Day, they will not have those 2 consecutive days to be with family. It would be a sad day if this Parliament passed a piece of legislation that was, at its very core and essence, anti-family and anti-community. But sadly, that's what this bill before us is. And even with the amendments proposed that I see have now been lodged with the clerks, the protections they seek to afford, although they may be well-intentioned, Mr Deputy President, they will not afford the protection, because by focusing on the freely elect to work, by focusing on penalties for breach, it ignores the economic reality that these vulnerable workers do not have the real choice because of their economic position, because of their vulnerable worker status, being casual or part-time for the most part, but also because, as I indicated, their federal legal instruments that govern that work effectively deprive them of a meaningful basis to resist a request from the employer. The employer doesn't need to coerce, doesn't need to be overbearing. The mere request itself, the economic situation, the legal reality, will create a situation where workers do not have the choice, and a request effectively becomes a direction. That is not the direction that this state should be moving in. The current balance, where some major centres, such as the Sydney CBD and other tourist areas, are permitted to trade on Boxing Day, are well accepted by the broader community. There is no one marching in the streets demanding that workers be able to be required to work packing shelves on Christmas Day and on the other restricted days. There are not people marching in the street outside this parliament demanding that the sales which occur on December 27 must be brought forward to December 26. It's simply an illusion. This is simply an ideological agenda being driven by the government parties and the other parties, as far as I can see, who all sought and obtained election to this chamber at the March election on a platform of protecting these restricted days, of keeping the status quo, should fulfil their electoral commitment and not transgress these core values that we all stood for election on, sought that election and obtained it. Thank you, Mr Deputy President.